in a lot of different countries. This is a sport that which has become even more popular through television. It is now actually competing on television with other sports like tennis and golf and swimming.
Yeah, you want to get on with this, you stupid
Yeah. Yeah, but what would you say about this sport, Shane, if it found itself in the position where its principal exponents, its very best players, were actually repelling rather than attracting the very television audience that provided the linchpin on the way that the game was funded? What do you think would happen to a game like that, Shane?
I'd say it'd be completely f***ed.
Yeah, if the public couldn't trust the results and people were found not to be honest and found the players' behaviour so conceited and unsporting that they refused to watch the programmes anymore.
Yeah, such a game would be completely f***ed.
Shane Warne, thank you very much for your time.
You're out, you c***.
Cricket always was a sport of high passions, and that's the program for tonight and the week. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back at the same time Monday, but for now, good night.
The following program is classified PG. It contains war footage that may distress some viewers.
Adelaide, 1936. This is the earliest known colour film of Anzac Day. The colour is real, a rare glimpse of a time usually only seen in black and white. These World War I veterans began the tradition of Australia and New Zealand fighting side by side. A tradition that will continue. A new war is coming.
This'll make you whistle, bound to make you whistle. Sweetie little jingle.
1938. Australia's colour home movies show a nation of carefree and active people. For many, the hard years of the Great Depression are fading. But a new threat to this sun and surf lifestyle has emerged on the other side of the world. Kathleen Thomas.
These are anxious days, even in this out-of-the-way continent. And one dreads the sight of the morning newspaper. It seems as if only a miracle can keep us out of one of the most ghastly wars imaginable.
A Nazi Party rally in central Germany. Fascism is threatening Europe. Adolf Hitler is rebuilding the nation, and he has territorial ambitions.
The German memorandum to Czechoslovakia has 6 main points. Certain territories in Czechoslovakia are to be ceded to Germany at once.
In New Zealand and Australia, defence forces are run down. Both countries rely on part-time armies. Less than half of these volunteer soldiers bother to attend their annual training camp. Fred Drake from Auckland.
Are we really awake? Our complacent attitude has no foundation in the facts. It should be the eager duty of every man to join a regiment and be ready to defend what he values so highly.
By 1939, Germany is ready for war. Hitler has annexed Austria and seized land from Czechoslovakia. Senior naval officer Rear Admiral Feeks writes after witnessing a Nazi rally.
If the youth of Australia realised that the youth of Europe are prepared to support any war policy, they would stampede their leaders and demand that they be given an opportunity to prepare for the defence of their country. When Hitler came to power, he found the youth of Germany in mutinous condition. He put them into uniform with wonderful results. That's what should be done here.
While there's a busy street.
Stratford School, New Zealand, August 1939. In a reenactment of King George VI's coronation, 12-year-old Shirley Feek is crowned Queen of the Carnival.
We can depend on you. Freedom remains.
For generations of New Zealand and Australian children, Britain has been home, the mother country. For the Anzac nations, the Empire is also their greatest defence. A letter to the Auckland Star.
Promises of peace and non-aggression are being broken almost daily. Britain has powerful enemies, and her whole force will have to be concentrated in Europe. What protection will New Zealand have then? A strong and united empire is our only hope.
The Empire will soon need its loyal members. One month later, the radio brings ominous news.
Here is a news flash. Germany has invaded Poland and has bombed many towns.
British and French attempts to appease Hitler have failed. September the 3rd, 1939, Father's Day. 15-year-old Patsy Smith from Melbourne notices her family is on edge.
Father hovered round the wireless all day. Prime Minister Menzies was to make an announcement. We sat waiting, Mum, Dad and Grandmother, whose son had been lost at Gallipoli. Missing, the notification had said.
Here is the Prime Minister of Australia, the Right Honourable R.G. Menzies.
Fellow Australians, it is my melancholy duty to inform you
now through the static we heard
that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her.
We are now at war with Germany.
And that as a result, Australia is also at war.
They played God Save the King. My mother said, God save us all.
New Zealand's Prime Minister, Michael Savage.
both with gratitude for the past and with confidence in the future, we range ourselves without fear beside Britain. Where she goes, we go. Where she stands, we stand.
The young men of Australia and New Zealand are about to fight in a devastating war on the other side of for the second time in 25 years.
Hello, Peter Hitchener. Angry Aboriginal mobs have burnt down buildings and threatened to kill police on Palm Island in northern Queensland during a riot over a death in custody. A ride by cycling group Critical Mass has ended in an anticlimax, with a heavy police presence preventing them travelling through the Bentleigh tunnel. Alleged drug boss Tony Mockbell has been committed for trial in the Supreme Court on charges of importing 3 kilograms of cocaine. A team of researchers and code breakers in England claims to have broken a 250-year-old code some believe will lead to the Holy Grail. And in sport, Rod Pampling has a 4-shot lead at the halfway mark in the Australian Open Golf Tournament. Hot and a top of 35 tomorrow.
The Blockbuster sale starts Saturday, and there are huge savings on movies and games, like iRobot for only $23.95, and pick up other hot movies with 20% off.
Which is memories on colour film before the boys go off to war. "21-year-old Lindsay has already left for the Middle East. When older brother Norm departs, he writes from on board the Queen Mary.
Look after your cough, Dad. And for goodness sake, get somebody to help in the shops. By the way, Mum, how many underpants did you give me, you darling old yapper? Don't break your neck to leave home, Collie. Take second-hand advice. There's no place like home. How's Red? Not so dumb after all, eh? And how's that big bum of yours, Gwen? You gorgeous thing. Not getting any bigger, I hope. No, I'm only kidding. Well, Mum, Dad, don't worry too much. I feel sure we'll all come back and make very good sons.
All 4 of the Dunbar boys join up to fight. Even young Red. Only 3 make it back. Lindsay dies during the disastrous Greek campaign. This war will affect the ANZAC nations like no other. More than 1 million Australian men and women, out of a population of 7 million, will wear a uniform by the end of the conflict. A quarter of New Zealand's population takes part in the war effort. But in these early uncertain days, the war is a distant event.
You got to accentuate the positive feeling. Minus to negative, latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with
New Zealand is 100. An exhibition to mark the centenary is staged in Wellington.
the maximum, bring gloom down to the minimum.
The wartime celebrations are controversial.
Who among us of any worth have the heart for self-glorification when every ounce of our money will be needed in the struggle ahead?
The exhibition says plainly to all of us that life goes on. If the crowds are smaller than they would have been in brighter days, we'll have more elbow room.
I think the centennial will be a marvellous stimulant for jaded nerves and will help to lift worries for a while.
The exhibition runs for over 5 months. but it is overshadowed when the country loses its leader.
It is with deep regret that we make the following official statement. Ministers, with profound sorrow, announce the death of the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Michael Joseph Savage. Today, Wednesday the 27th of March 1940.
Thousands of mourners line Auckland's streets. Michael Savage's funeral carriage is draped with the flag from the victorious New Zealand warship, the HMS Achilles.
Coming right past now, they're following the course of the casket. Arrows on either side, and they're waving the green branches as they bring the canoe to its last resting place.
Australian-born and raised Savage is replaced by his deputy, Peter Fraser, who will lead the country for the rest of the war.
The German army invaded Holland and Belgium early this morning by land and by landings from parachutes.
In April 1940, Germany launches blitzkrieg attacks, ending a 7-month standoff.
The Germans have been bombing again today, mainly roads and aerodromes and refugees.
This new type of lightning war horrifies even those on the other side of the world. Mrs. Edmondson from Liverpool, New South Wales.
The Germans are behaving like fiends, driving heavy tanks over the fallen and those on the overcrowded roads, machine gunning them as they ran. Paper quote's the most ghastly thing that's ever taken place in history, with dive bombers blowing up everything before them.
The British Expeditionary Force, with their French allies, are fighting a desperate battle in the northern zone of the Western Front. They have withdrawn some miles towards the coast.
The Germans overrun most of northern and western Europe in only 8 weeks, sweeping the Allied armies before them. Great Britain fortifies and waits for invasion.
Mr. Potter. Mr. Potter. Harry Potter. Witchcraft and wizard.
London is burning. Adolf Hitler wants to crush the British spirit. He orders his bombers to attack their cities by night. The Blitz. A letter to the Melbourne Age in response to the destruction.
12,000 miles away, civilians of our own race are being slaughtered. Their homes are being blasted out of existence. Here in Australia, we rest peacefully in our beds. If Britain falls beneath the savage blows of Germany, the next stage on his march of conquest will be the outposts of the Empire.
We thought that it was over there, but they've started it all over.
The ANZAC nations react to the mother country's plight in a way they'll continue for the rest of the war, by sending food and care parcels.
Our share. It's up to you and it's up to me.
We have to thank God that it's not yet our country which has felt the horrors of war.
It's up to you and it's up.
The best way to prevent a similar fate is to throw all our weight behind those who are so bravely bearing the brunt today.
Tired of all he preaches and his double-crossing speeches. Oh, it's up to you and me.
On a visit to Britain in February 1941, Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies films the devastation of the Blitz in colour. From Menzies' Daily Journal.
The impression grows that the best value of this mission is to encourage and lift up the people here. They've had a bad time and want a boost to their spirits. I'm now recognised wherever I go, and autograph books are produced.
British Prime Minister Winston Churchill broadcasts to Australia.
It has been a great encouragement and comfort to us to have Mr. Menzies here in these critical days. His vitality, his wisdom in council, and his will to win help us all to face the long, hard task which lies ahead. We all share your pride in the fighting forces of Australia, worthy heirs to the famous ANZACS tale.
Singapore. A worried Australian government has sent troops to strengthen the British naval base. It hopes to deter an increasingly aggressive Japan. Private Gilbert Mant reassures his brother.
Believe me, John, Singapore's impregnable, all right. Big guns pointing out to sea. They'll never get in that way. You couldn't get a tank through the jungle. All they could do would be bring them down the roads. And what do? Wait around one of the corners and knock them out one by one. Don't you worry, old boy, about Malaya. We've got it sewn up as tight as anything can be sewn up.
Singapore is the Empire's front line in the Far East. Prime Minister Menzies is concerned that it is a fortress in name only.
We are grievously short of aircraft, and the absence of naval craft must encourage the Japanese. This Far Eastern problem must be taken seriously.
With most Australian and New Zealand warships fighting with Britain in Europe, Menzies asks for Singapore to be reinforced. But Churchill says no. Japan is only a threat. The war with Hitler must come first. It's a decision that many Australians will never forget.
On the farm every Friday.
New Zealand has a secret weapon.
It's rabbit pie day, so every Friday that ever comes along,
Public Works Minister Robert Semple has built a tank using a Caterpillar tractor and corrugated steel.
Run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, 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 run.
He hopes that the Kiwi tank will raise local morale.
Run, run.
But there's a problem.
Bang, bang, bang goes the farmer's gun.
From the Chief Engineer's instructions before the first parade in Auckland.
In changing gears, the machine will momentarily come to a standstill unless a change is made while the machine is running downhill. As little gear changing as possible should occur so that the public will not get the impression that stalling of the machine has occurred along the route.
The tank is paraded around the country, but Mr. Semple's dream of a fleet of them is never realised. The army rejects the design as too heavy and too slow.
So run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run.
Semple's tank is a novel solution to a serious problem. The Anzac nations are poorly protected. The best equipment and trained men are being sent to fight overseas.
A buzzer took a monkey for a ride in the air. The monkey thought that everything was on the square.
1941.
Tried to throw the monkey off his back.
Young airmen take it easy in Canada.
Listen, Jack, straighten up and fly right.
From the Royal Australian Air Force's guide for pilot selection.
Straighten up and fly right.
A small, stocky man is desirable. He should be a keen sportsman, possessed of energy and stamina.
What's the use of jiving?
Should be a popular type, inspiring liking and respect in his fellows, and have a gift for leadership.
Australia and New Zealand are sending airmen to Canada for final training. These three countries will provide half of the 50,000 aircrew that Britain needs each year to survive.
Straighten up and fly right. Straighten up and stay right.
Ken Irving from Mildura.
This afternoon, I had my first taste of formation flying. It isn't as easy as it looks. In fact, it's quite hazardous. I was supposed to fly at 300 feet, but my instructor let me fly right on the deck. I took her up hill and down dale, over trees, fences and houses. It was great.
Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top. Fly right.
Most of these graduates will serve in Britain and the Mediterranean. But they'll die at an alarming rate. 1 in 3 will be killed in combat. Things aren't much better on the ground. Greece, April 1941. An ANZAC corps is fighting with the Greeks against a massive German force. Louis Horton writes to his brother Wynne.
We passed hundreds of refugees on the roads with carts, and others carrying their belongings on their backs. There were dozens of children, and to see what they were putting up with on the road would make anyone fighting mad.
The ANZAC troops soon discover what it's like to fight a modern war without adequate air cover. Clarence Moss writes in his diary.
Friday, 25th of April, Anzac Day. Mostly New Zealanders and Aussies fighting this rearguard action. It's obvious that the show's drawing to a close. Just a matter of the individual result. Death, prison, or escape.
The Allies are overpowered in less than 3 weeks. Many of the ANZAC troops are evacuated to defend the airbase on Crete. They enjoy a brief moment in the sun, but the Germans are on their way. Captain Harding Leaf is with the Maori Battalion.
My dear son, after Greece, I'm thankful that you aren't in this dreadful business of slaughter. We're expecting an invasion any time now, and we're ready for a real rough house this time, on the level, foot to foot, and no tanks. Cheerio, Aroha Nui, Dad.
The the battle for Crete is over in 11 days. "49-year-old Harding Leaf is posted missing, believed killed after the German airborne invasion.
Let's say goodbye with a smile, dear, just for a while, dear.
Back home, thoughts of the troops are never far from their families' minds.
Don't let this parting upset you.
In Adelaide, amateur filmmaker George Bolton begins an extraordinary one-man campaign. While Australian troops are fighting in a desperate siege at Tobruk in North Africa, he calls their families together at a local park. He films them in colour for what he calls next of kin messages. George sends the film to Tobruk and includes a note to the soldiers.
This little picture was compiled to show you chaps glimpses of your dear ones back home.
I will just say hello to the
Some of you will see little strangers who've come into being since your departure, and most of you will see those that you hold most dear, all of whom await your return.
meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
John Johnson is one of the Tobruk defenders. His wife Josie is raising their 8 children on her own.
My own darling, I feel a shell without you. I love you more each day. As for the night, well, I told you about that. My first thought every morning is, I wonder is he all right? And my last thought, God keep him for me. Your 6 sons and 2 little girls send love and kisses. And there's a million more from your wife Josie.
I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
This Tuesday is...
On the home front, it's easy to relax and feel secure. The war is 19,000 kilometres away, and many still believe that Singapore is impregnable.
What you do with the way that you do it, that's what gets results. Say what you do with the time that you do it. Say what you do with the time that you do it. Say what you do with the time that you do it.
When Australia's military chief, General Thomas Blamey, returns from the Middle East in November 1941, he decides it's time for strong words.
You're living in a fool's paradise. Everything out here shows a spirit of carnival, while everywhere else in the world people are fighting for their lives. Don't delude yourself that peace is at your doorstep. It isn't. Before we are through, every man will be required. Women must take the places of men. I don't want to see women waving flags and marching about. They should be preparing themselves for the tasks men have now.
The way that you do it, that's what gets results.
Blamey's wake-up call comes just in time. "70-year-old Ethel Turner records dramatic events in her diary across 1 week at the start of December 1941.
The rumours are true. Our best-loved warship, the Sydney, has been sunk. 625 on board. Hardly a hope survives. War comes closer and closer. I'm almost afraid to open a newspaper. Pearl Harbor bombed. Manila, too. American warships on fire. War beyond any written words.
Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor has brought the United States into the war. Singapore prepares for a Japanese onslaught. Only 3 days later, there's more bad news. The British warship sent to reinforce Singapore, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, are sunk. General Gordon Bennett is the senior Australian officer in Malaya.
This disaster has cast a heavy gloom over everybody. This is a bad omen. It shows that the enemy air force is stronger than we anticipated, and it proves that our sea power in the Far East is shattered. On the Australian front, the men are afraid of nothing and nobody. The prestige of the Empire must suffer severely if we fail to defeat the Japanese. If the enemy is not stopped here, he'll become so cocksure that he'll tackle anything. Even Australia itself.
New Zealand and Australia dig in. They face the prospect of an invasion for the first time in their history. New Zealand's Prime Minister Peter Fraser.
Let there be no doubt. If there is a raid, we will repulse it. If there is an invasion, we'll hurl it back. But we must work as never before to do this. Anyone who obstructs or shirks in any capacity is an enemy who cannot be excused.
Everyone is terrified of air raids. Newsreel cinemas still show graphic images of London's Blitz. People now realise it can happen here. John Dooley Jr. writes to his father in Malaya.
Since the Japs have come into the war, we're getting things done here. Plans have been drawn up for the evacuation of children and elderly persons. Each household is expected to black out all lights visible to the sea and have implements at hand to deal with fires and the like. With love and prayers for your safety, John Dooley.
The letter never arrives. Japan is moving too fast. On February 15th, 1942, less than 10 weeks after Japan entered the war, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill broadcasts to the world.
Tonight, I speak to you in Australia and New Zealand, for whose safety we will strain every nerve, to our gallant allies, the Dutch and Chinese, and to our kith and kin in the United States. I speak to you all under the shadow of a heavy and far-reaching military defeat. It is a British and imperial defeat. Singapore has fallen.
More than 15,000 Australian troops are prisoners of the Japanese. From the diary of poet Dame Mary Gilmore.
Singapore is another Churchill empty brag, a present to Japan. Not a means of defence, but an iron cage from which there's no escape. We sent England 147,000 men, and she, with her small area and fortified coastline, makes no move to return them to us, whose land is a continent with an unfortified coastline. We'll burn like the pine streets of Chicago.
Darwin, February 19th, 1942. Only 4 days after the fall of Singapore, Australia is attacked. On board HMAS Karangi, able seaman Harry Dale writes to his mother.
Wherever you look, there are burning or sinking ships. Looks like a direct hit on the Peary. She's sinking stern first. Nearly under now. The town looks to have some big fires. No one on our ship has been hit. We certainly have been lucky. Hope they don't come back.
One hour later, the Japanese attack again. The town is left in ruins. Almost every building is damaged. 8 ships are sunk. 251 people die. The ANZAC nations are in shock. Mrs. Gill from Christchurch.
I'm of the opinion that Japan wanted to take New Zealand before Australia, as Australia will then be surrounded. If our daughters are left at the mercy of the Japs, words fail me. If I had a gun, I'd shoot my children myself before I'd let the Japs touch them.
Bill McConaughey is a Kiwi airman stationed in England.
The way the Japs are advancing, it seems to me that all New Zealand and Australian soldiers and airmen should be given the chance to go look after the people at home.
Recalling troops will cause tension. Now that Japan controls Singapore, Winston Churchill wants 2 Australian divisions diverted to defend Burma. Australia's new Prime Minister John Curtin wants them home. A letter from Curtin to his wife, Elsie.
The war goes badly, and I have a cable fight with Churchill almost every day. The truth is that Britain never thought that Japan would fight, and made no preparation to meet that eventuality.
But salvation comes from a new protector. With Britain preoccupied in Europe, the ANZAC nations look to the USA. American Commander General Douglas MacArthur speaks to the Australian Parliament in March 1942.
We shall win or we shall die, and to this end I pledge you the full resources of all the mighty power of my country and the blood of my countrymen. My faith in our ultimate victory is invincible.
Midway, 3 months later, a major fleet of Japanese warships is on its way to attack the island and the American fleet. If the Japanese succeed, they'll control the Pacific. Australia and New Zealand will be isolated. Like the Battle of the Coral Sea 1 month earlier, this is a new type of naval battle. The opposing warships never see each other. Midway is fought and won from the air. American sailor Arthur Burke writes home on the day of the victory.
Dearest Mom and Dad, well, the Navy gave the Japs quite a licking, eh? It sure sounds like propaganda to say all those Jap carriers, battleships, and cruisers were sunk. With US losses only one carrier, doesn't it? But incredible as it may seem, it's all true.
Midway brings the relentless Japanese advance to a halt. Australia and New Zealand are safer. The long fight to reclaim the Pacific can now begin.
Rock-a-bye, my baby, there ain't gonna be no war. There ain't gonna be no war over here.
Australia, October 1942.
It's all on the other side. We ain't
It may not look like it, but there's a war on.
We're gonna have peace and quiet, and if they start a riot,
The Japanese have overrun the Pacific. Darwin is being regularly bombed.
the only place you go marching to.
Yet crowds pack the racecourses.
So rock-a-bye, my baby, there ain't gonna be no war.
Gambling is up 30% in the past year alone. Prime Minister John Curtin.
These people are trying to make a Roman holiday out of a national tragedy. In a country where every ounce of coal is needed for the war effort, we must provide extra trains for race services so that a man can pick a winner. That isn't total war. That is not organising a country to fight.
Curtin bans Saturday race meetings once a month and asks Australians for a greater war effort.
It's a brown slouch hat with a side turned up, and it means the world to me.
A few months later, Australia's 9th Division arrives back from the Middle East to fight the Japanese. They find a home front more preoccupied with its own problems than the war overseas. Corporal Alan Jones.
A few people asked me about the Middle East, listened politely for a few minutes, then told me heartbreaking tales about petrol rationing, the arrival of the Americans, the Kokoda Trail, and finally, the greatest battle ever fought, the bombing of Darwin.
Before their return, these soldiers, along with New Zealand troops, took part in the famous battle for El Alamein in North Africa.
This is the BBC Home and Forces programme. The Axis forces in the Western Desert are now in full retreat.
The New Zealand Division is still facing the Germans. It's part of the British 8th Army's pursuit of a fleeing enemy.
The enemy's losses in killed and wounded have been exceptionally high.
Dr. Helen Cowie writes to her son Graham, an Army medical officer.
We're following the exploits of the 8th Army with the greatest zest and hope the enemy will soon be driven out of Africa. Little Jane said one day, "Germans are very naughty people." Then with sublime faith added, "But they can't hurt us, Granny. Uncle Graham will chase them away." So you see, much depends on you.
The Allies are now advancing from the west and the east. There is nowhere left for the Germans to run. They dig into the mountains of Tunisia. Thomas Burks is a beekeeper from Auckland.
An attack was made by our side. One of the chaps was on top of the hill, so had a wonderful view, which he described as being too much like the conventional idea of an attack to be real. shells from our artillery and bombs from planes falling on the enemy. Then a line of tanks advancing behind the bursts. One might expect to see it on the screen, but I wouldn't think to see it in reality.
The New Zealanders take part in a 3,000-kilometre chase across North Africa. In May 1943, all resistance collapses.
Yesterday afternoon at about 4:30, the war in North Africa came to an end.
Over 230,000 Axis troops are taken prisoner.
Across the neck of the Cape Bon Peninsula.
With Africa back in Allied hands, the New Zealand government once again considers recalling its soldiers. Clarence Moss and Frank Dent speak for many of the men.
The division should go home and fight in the Pacific. Let's fight with the Australians.
We Kiwis would like to have a go at the yellow swine and finish all of this useless slaughter.
But the Kiwi and Aussie armies have now gone their separate ways. Australia's priority will be defeating Japan. New Zealand wants its men to stay and beat Hitler first. (1943). The tide is turning in the battle for New Guinea. A combined Australian and American force is driving back a determined Japan. Pilot Bill Newton writes to an army friend.
Surprise, you old bastard. I won't be able to share your leave. At the moment, we're very busy persuading Tojo that it's unsafe to send ships to New Guinea. Stay away, young man, is very good advice. It's okay for the Air Force, but for the poor bloody infantry, the game stinks.
No colour film is known to exist of the hard battles along the Kokoda Track, when outnumbered and outgunned Australian soldiers repelled the advancing Japanese. The Allies are now gaining the upper hand, but the conditions are just as harsh. A diary note from gunner Ron Flew.
It rained like hell most of the day. We could do nothing but sit and watch the drips come onto our beds. The advance is at a standstill.
Chaplain Smith from the 2nd 9th General Hospital is working among the casualties.
To see these men arrive wounded and racked with malaria, absolutely exhausted, having lain in mud and slush fighting a desperate, cruel foe they could not see, has made me feel that nothing is too good for them.
By mid-1943, Japan's supply lines are crippled. The long fight to force them out of New Guinea altogether can now begin. As the Japanese retreat, the Allies make an alarming discovery. Canisters of poison gas. Although banned under the Geneva Convention, Japan has already used mustard gas against China in the mid-1930s. Innisfail, North Queensland. Fearing Japan will use poison gas again, the Australian government allows British scientists to perform secret tests. Volunteer Jack Baird.
One morning, they asked for any volunteers for a gas school. We thought it was something to do with tear gas. At the school, they told us it was mustard gas.
Allied military leaders want to know what effect the gas has in a tropical climate. From the official record of the tests.
The most accurate way of exposing men to mustard vapor is by use of the gas chamber.
In a 3-week period, each man is exposed to mustard gas at least 3 times.
We didn't know much about it until we copped it. They said, step out if you don't want to go through with it. No one stepped out. Being Australians, you don't let your mates down.
This volunteer is of great interest on account of the severity of the burns on his hands and forearms. Despite this, there was very little pain, so long as the blisters remained intact.
The tests find that mustard gas is at least 4 times more powerful in the tropics than in cooler climates.
Burns are assessed by the man's ability to fire a rifle. This volunteer was classed as partially disabled during his stay in hospital, which was necessitated solely because of the condition of his scrotum.
More than 1,000 Australians take part in the tests. Many are veterans of the Middle East and New Guinea. Japan never uses its chemical weapons. The Australian volunteers are the only victims of gas during the Pacific War.
In Arcadia, they found a new life.
We're doing okay.
We are?
New conflict.
Australia and New Zealand have been invaded, but not by the Japanese.
The United States Armed Forces Radio Network welcomes into its worldwide chain 1ZM Auckland.
By mid-1943, hundreds of thousands of US troops have arrived, and they're hard to miss.
You'll hear the kings of the crooners, Bing Crosby and Frank the Voice Sinatra.
The dulcet tones of the lean and lovely Miss Shore. Dinah, to you, ma'am.
He was a famous trumpet man from our Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was the top
To some, the Yanks are glamour boys with plenty of cash.
then he was gone with a draft. He's in the army.
Others are less impressed.
He's a boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. They made him
Morris Coppersmith writes to his parents back home.
The Australian soldier is jealous of the American serviceman and has begun to resent him.
in boogie rhythm. He can't blow it.
Our boys spent more money on the girls. The Aussie hasn't a chance.
He makes a couple jump.
Fights in the street are frequent.
He's a boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B.
Not everyone wants to fight the Americans. When Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the US president, visits, she's greeted like royalty. A young New Zealand girl is moved to write for her school magazine.
I once read that she was the ugliest woman you could hope to see. Whoever wrote that could never have seen her personally, for no camera could ever reproduce the radiance in her smile. A smile that shines from the heart.
Newspapers print daily extracts from Mrs. Roosevelt's diary.
Rotorua is in the heart of Maori country. We found children bathing in a hot pool and they dived for pennies for us. Guide Rangi told us that they never quarrelled if one child got more pennies. I've been invited to visit New Zealand and Australia to see the work that the women are doing. I think they're making their biggest contribution to the farms, since their men are in the armed forces and no other manpower is available.
Thousands of women are contributing to food production. Jean Sims from Bondi is with the Land Army.
Dear Mum and Dad, we're picking peas. It's bloody hot and the flies are driving us nuts. Grumble, grumble. And, this'll make you gasp, Italian POWs in a camp about 50 yards away, fenced with barbed wire they could step over. It's laughable. I wonder if our boys are having the same war.
In the Pacific, the Americans have the numbers. Australian and New Zealand forces are fighting bravely in the tough campaign. But it's US military might that has dominated the defence. Now, it's time to attack. In November 1943, United States Marines leave New Zealand to start the island-hopping drive that will force the enemy back to Japan. Tarawa, a tiny atoll no bigger than New York's Central Park. Jim Lucas is a Marine Corps volunteer and war correspondent. He writes to his friend Morris in New Zealand 3 months after the landing.
I can't tell the story of Tarawa without breaking down and crying like a baby. Matty and I both knew it was pretty risky. He gave me his wife's address and I gave him mine. Matty was dead 15 minutes later. The shell which took the life of our friend knocked me unconscious too. God knows I am no hero. Matty wouldn't go off and leave me if I were hurt, so I picked him up. His left arm was gone. As I stood up, a Marine asked quietly, "Your buddy?" I was too full to do anything but nod. "Tough luck," he said. "They killed my kid brother this morning."
The Americans suffer over 3,000 casualties in 3 days.
I stayed with the Marines until we'd killed every Jap. I killed 6, and I wish it were 600, 60,000, 6 million. I never knew it was possible for a human being to hate another as I hate those yellow men. I lost at least 50 friends at Tarawa, men I'd known and loved in New Zealand. In 3 days, we lost more in dead than we lost in 6 months in Guadalcanal. Remember us, Morris. And do all you can to make the folks there in New Zealand realize what those boys did on Tarawa. Sincerely, Jim.
After 5 years of war, the home front is besieged by shortages. Food production goes first to Britain or to the American forces in the Pacific. Nancy Hooper writes to her husband in New Guinea.
I feel vaguely ill tonight. Lately, one can't get decent food to eat. We can't buy potatoes, onions, eggs, or bacon. We get bad tomatoes and an occasional lettuce. Oh, shopping is impossible down here.
The ANZAC nations have reached their limit. They can no longer supply fighting men, food, and weapons at the same time. In desperation, both countries released troops from the services. War production has been revolutionized by using women. Now, some wonder what will happen when all the men come home.
Can you think of anything worse than going back to jam tin labels? I just live for the moment, completely absorbed in my job.
It wouldn't be so bad if I could see my husband occasionally, but he's miles away. I can't wait for the day when I'll be waiting on one man instead of about 30.
I'm getting married as soon as I can after the war. I'm tired of trying to be independent. I'm one of those people who likes someone to lean on.
Come over the Hobbit and Jack and Mule upon the Piper's Son. Leave your cupboard, forget your spill, we're going to have some fun.
Children are also doing their bit, fighting shortages by foraging for old paper, tin, and rubber. A young Princess Elizabeth speaks to them on the radio.
When peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. My sister is by my side. Come on, Margaret, say good night. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
Maybe you'll think of me when you are all alone.
A whole generation is growing up without their fathers.
Maybe
Letters are their lifeline.
is waiting.
Bruce Atchison's dad is based in Darwin.
The first thing I had to tell you is where I came in my test. I came first in the boys and second in class. Mummy said if I came first, second or third, you'd buy me a horse. You're the very best daddy in the world. Don't forget my horse.
Wadestown School, Wellington. Even on fancy dress day, the war is never far away. Rosalind Cowie is too young to write. Her mum writes for her.
Rosalind expects you to arrive home any day. Your photo gets so many kisses, I'll have to wash the glass.
Eris Ashby's father is a prisoner of war.
My darling Daddy, at last I am able to write to you. We'll be very happy when you're home again. We've saved all our reports from school to show you. We hope you'll be pleased with them.
Stan Ashby never receives the letter. He's one of many fathers who don't make it home.
And maybe I'll say maybe.
June 1944. long-awaited news reaches Australia and New Zealand.
D-Day has come. Early this morning, the Allies began the assault on the northwestern face of Hitler's European forces.
After years of war, the end could be in sight.
Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.
Little Rosalind Cowie may not have to kiss her father's photo for much longer.
Hello, BBC. This is Richard Dimbleby.
Her mother Margaret writes,
The operation began about midnight last night.
The last few days have seen thrilling events.
Troops who landed on the coast of France.
The fall of Rome and the landing in France.
Broad daylight this morning are already several miles in.
We all feel so excited we can hardly do anything but listen to the wireless.
They are pushing steadily on.
It really looks as though the end of Germany may only be a matter of months now.
And covered by an ever-changing but ever-present umbrella of fighters.
The liberation of France has begun. Now it is time for the Allies to reclaim Europe.
Summer, the sun, the fun, tragedies of the greatest seaborne invasion of all time. The Colour of War, D-Day, next on 9.
The Japanese Empire, once conqueror of most of the South Pacific, is being beaten back. It turns to desperate tactics. In October 1944, the HMAS Australia became the first ship struck by a kamikaze pilot. Sub-Lieutenant Peter Adams watched the attack from the deck of the cruiser, HMAS Shropshire.
Before we knew what the score was, 4 came low at us. Everything seemed to be happening at once. Then, Christ, the Aussies got it. She just exploded. She burned like a torch. Then we got the story. The plane came in and suicided. Just stunned us.
The Australia survives at least 5 kamikaze attacks. But close to 400 ships are sunk or damaged by the end of the war. Most of them are American. The suicide attacks don't stop the Allied advance. The end of the war will reveal another horror: the Japanese mistreatment of prisoners of war. This colour film, taken in 1945, shows the survivors of a camp in southern Thailand. Corporal Tom Pledger has kept a secret diary since his capture in February 1942.
The Japs are bashing and beating because the boys can't do the work. I've eaten rats and snails. Fancy me developing into a person who'd eat rats. But, well, we have to eat to get home to you all. And I'll eat anything to do that.
More than 1/3 of those held captive by the Japanese have died. The Allies first learn of the POW's mistreatment after a dramatic sea rescue. As the Japanese retreated, they used prison ships to transfer POWs to Japan for use as forced labour. Stanley Costello, a British prisoner from Yorkshire.
We left, bound for Japan. But they hadn't reckoned with the Yanks. In the morning, we felt 2 torpedoes go through our boat. After the nips had left in the lifeboats, we got ourselves a raft.
Able seaman Arthur Bancroft has already survived one sinking. His ship, the HMAS Perth.
We were free for the first time in 2.5 years. As far as we were concerned, we could do what we wanted. That's when we abandoned ship, throwing ourselves in the hand of fate again.
Jack Turner from South Australia was on the same prison ship to Japan.
As the men lost their reasoning, they'd leave the raft, saying they were going to the canteen for a drink. We pulled them back, time and again. But as we became weaker, we could do nothing for them. It was a painless death for the majority of the poor buggers. We were exhausted, as thirsty as the devil, when we sighted a submarine on the horizon.
The log of the skipper of the American submarine, USS Pampanito, Lieutenant Commander Paul Summers.
The men were all exhausted after 4 days on the raft and 3 years of imprisonment. Many had lashed themselves to their makeshift rafts. Pitiful sight none of us will ever forget.
The crew washed the oil off our bodies, gave up their beds and cared for us. We were given oranges, apples and ice cream, our first for nearly 3 years, and oh boy, did they taste good.
More than 1,200 men had been aboard the Japanese prison ship, Rocky Maru. Only 295 survived. The war is creating devastation on a scale never seen before. Close to 60 million people will die. Entire cities are being ruined. The 2nd New Zealand Army Division has been fighting in Italy for 18 months. Corporal Des Davies tells his family.
I went into casino to see what we'd been bumping our heads against for so many months. The whole town is just a mass of ruins, which have to be seen to be believed. The monastery's just an empty shell. It was certainly a tough nut to crack. When I return, I want to throw my rifle away and forget there ever was a war. On looking around Italy, I can only thank God the war never reached New Zealand. You folks can't visualize that such suffering could go on in a civilized world.
April 25th, 1945. Soviet troops have entered Berlin. On every front, the Germans are broken and demoralized. New Zealand soldiers at Italy's River Po prepare for their final offensive. Their commander, General Bernard Freyberg, VC, broadcasts an Anzac Day message.
To New Zealanders and Australians, ANZAC conjures up memories of beach landings on Gallipoli. spirit of ANZAC has not changed. It shines as ever because of your deeds in the Middle East and the Pacific. We are now here in Italy and are expecting to finish off the war in Europe at an early date. Good luck, ANZACS. I say to you, Kia ora katoa.
Germany has surrendered. It is the 8th of May, 1945. Peace has come to Europe at last. It is streamers and confetti, not bomb debris, that will now need to be cleared from London's streets. All around Australia and New Zealand, there are victory parades. But the festivities are overshadowed by a stark reality. The Women's Weekly tells its readers,
"The war in Europe is over. But great as the rejoicing has been, Australians haven't been able to give up their whole hearts to it. The real heartfelt rejoicing will take place only when the Japanese have been disposed of."
For most New Zealanders, the war is over. Australia's final campaign is already underway. Operation Oboe. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, wants to reclaim the oil-rich islands of Dutch and British Borneo. The assault starts on Tarakan Island. Signalman Mervyn Ether from the HMAS Manoora.
Hundreds of sailors and soldiers swung into Lillimar Lane. The song was the same, but the German composer would never have recognised his lyrics. Privates Colby and Corrigan had composed their own lyrics entitled "We'll Capture Tarakan." With sharp, cracking bursts, they commenced the invasion. Flight after flight of RAAF Liberators put in an appearance. Hundreds of heavy bombs splattered along the beach.
On the day after the landing, Lieutenant Colin Simper writes a hurried note to his wife Renee.
"Well, honey, I heard the Germans have chucked it in. I'm certainly glad about that. All my love to the babies. I'm thinking of you constantly. Lovingly yours forever, Col."
As the Australians advance inland, they hear graphic stories from locals about Japanese mistreatment of prisoners of war. Private John Ewan is a mailman from Cootamundra.
"Our fellas won't take prisoners. I've seen them kill 2 or 3 now in cold blood. I took a dim view of it the first time, but when you see your mates go, well, I'd do it myself now."
The landing at Tarakan is followed by others at Labuan Island and Balikpapan. Colin Simper sends letters to Rini as often as he can.
You can well swank, darling, because our troops are doing a wonderful job. Regarding me keeping snaps of you in your bathers, I kept them because I have a slight crush on your skin, if you understand me. I leave you cheerful of the future, with fondest love from your old man who lives for you.
Colin dies 3 days later. The American Pacific push has almost reached Tokyo. There is growing concern that Australian lives are being wasted in mopping up operations. Sergeant Vern Stone.
Why must we go on putting our backs to this task and hating it more every moment? Japan's getting the lights knocked out of her. The conquest of the Pacific is nearly complete. I'd give everything to be on my way home.
The fighting will soon be over. Three months after the landing on Tarakan, Borneo is secured. It's time to think about home. Alan Hooper writes to his wife for the 288th time.
Dearest Nancy, the long years of separation are fast drawing to an end. I'll save my elation for the day Japan caves in. I suppose I'll be restless and maladjusted for many months after the army turns me loose. But I'll try and fit in and make you happy. So help me God. The very thought of being beside you overwhelms me. It's like dreaming with eyes open. My fondest love, my heart really does ache for you. Alan.
Sunday, Russell Crowe presents the magnificent final chapter of The Colour of War, the ANZACS.
The Cold War is about to begin.
Vietnam and Korea, two of the most graphic conflicts of all time, shown like never before. True colour and true stories from true blue Aussie heroes.
West plans a dress rehearsal for nuclear war.
A page in Australia's history you can't miss. When The Colour of War concludes, 7:30 Sunday.
August 9th, 1945. Colour film taken over Nagasaki, Japan. The United States drops its second atomic bomb in 3 days. World War II is over. But the fallout will continue for years. Victory in the Pacific brings 6 long years of war to an end. A wave of joy and relief sweeps across Australia and New Zealand. In Adelaide, they're dancing in the streets. School teacher Anne Stewart.
The Japanese had surrendered. We celebrated all day and well into the night. Shops emptied, streamers were thrown from office windows. Impromptu processions meandered through the jubilant throng.
Mary Webster anticipates her husband's return.
I'll run mad when Bill comes back. I've only seen him 3 times since we've been married. I'm going to give up work and get on with having a family. Bill will be out of uniform then, just at the time when an allotment with a kiddie would help. But who cares, as long as the war's over?
The troops begin the long journey home. New Zealand Spitfire pilot Colin Paps tries out his colour film on a stopover in Perth. New Zealand Prime Minister Peter Fraser voices the hopes of a war-weary people.
We must see to it, with a new world based upon social justice and human brotherhood, that the dead have not died in vain. And I believe that New Zealand will rise to any and every occasion.
When you put on that old blue suit again, I'll come running out to meet you at the door.
Sydney Harbour. The Australian and New Zealand troops have landed.
Town, and my pop will tell 'em how you won the war.
Private Jameson is already making plans.
It's good to know that there is a job ready and waiting for me just to step into in Wanganui. We'll be able to have a nice, comfortable little home and a future that is both steady and sure.
One-third of the 24,000 Australians held prisoner by the Japanese do not survive the war. Vivian Lowe is there to greet some who make it home.
We just all stood there and cried because they couldn't walk and were driven along in trucks. I'd lost 2 cousins on the Burma Railway, so I just stood there and howled. But that's not what they really wanted, so we had to try not to show it.
Peter Airy echoes the feelings of thousands of demobbed servicemen.
I want to do all those ordinary things which war services deny me. I want to rediscover the pleasures of gardening. And once again, secretly compete with my neighbour to make my lawn the best in the street. I won't want to talk about world affairs too much, least of all the past war. I don't want riches. I want a steady job with reasonable security and something set aside for a rainy day and old age.
Many will find it hard adjusting to civilian life. Sergeant John McNeil receives this letter from his wife Betty before his return.
Dearest John, you're going to find a lot of changes when you come back. First there's me. Don't expect a glamour girl to meet you at the station. I'm definitely a working mother, and that's another thing you might find it hard to get used to. You see, I've had to be the boss while you've been away, and though I'll be glad to give up masculine jobs like chopping wood and mending the taps, you'll probably find me a bit officious at first. I hope you won't be disappointed in the kids. Ian and Jean are used to having only me in the house, and you mustn't be hurt if they regard you as an intruder at first. It'll take us all a while to adapt ourselves to having a man in the house again.
The year to come will produce two things: a baby boom and a doubling of the annual divorce rate. But the newly won peace will be short-lived. A new conflict, the Cold War, is about to begin.
Sunday nights a killer double on Channel 9. At 8:30 CSI.
Your people can't solve this crime.
We'll keep you guessing until the very end.
He scare you? Talk a little funny?
Then at 9:30.
What's going on?
Compulsive crime-stopping drama.
Move, let's go!
1949. New Zealand and Australian services are short of fit, trained fighting men. Since the war, thousands have returned to civilian life. Now both countries bring in compulsory national service to meet the new threat of communism.
We all have laid on us today a duty to be prepared, to be strong, not with the strength of a bully, but with the strength of a deliverer.
Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies addresses the US Congress.
The world needs the United States of America. The world needs the British peoples of the world. The world needs every scrap of democratic strength.
But the Cold War against the communists is about to erupt in Korea. June 25th, 1950. US President Harry S. Truman.
Without warning and without provocation, communist forces of the North launched a coordinated full-scale assault on the Republic of Korea.
A United Nations force is quickly thrown into action. With these troops, Australia becomes the second country after the US to sign on. Prime Minister Menzies.
Australia will be once more, as in the last Great War, fighting side by side with the American troops, the American sailors, with the American airmen.
New Zealand contributes 1,000 volunteers for combat duty. But sending a new generation of young men to war does not sit well with everyone. Private Roy Rose of Australia's K-Force.
Dear Mum and Dad, I'm sorry to hear that you feel ashamed of me and that you think I've fallen as low as I can by volunteering in this force. As I didn't go and do anything in the last war, I volunteered because it would be a chance to travel and see another country. I'm doing my bit, helping stop these bloody communists. I'm not trying to be a hero.
Several months later, Private Rose is killed in action. A year into the fighting, New Zealand ups its commitment to the United Nations force by sending the frigates Taupo and Hawer. Crossing the equator, the crew unwinds with a traditional visit by King Neptune. Despite the high spirits, the war is on everyone's minds. Midshipman Tom Riddell is 18.
We expected to go into action, but there were lots of uncertainties. Would it be against submarines, mines, or aircraft? Would the Russians come in, or China? How good were the North Koreans?
The Royal Australian Air Force is attacking targets within 12 miles of the Soviet Union. The North Koreans are backed by the newest communist superpower, China. The world is on a knife edge. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
I do not say that what has happened and is happening in Korea has made the dangers of a third world war greater. They were already grave.
As the war enters its third year, the UN forces have little to show for their heavy losses. The best equipped army in the world is going nowhere. And there are questions about American tactics. Corporal Ian Mackley writes home.
The Yank artillery is terrible, and they just fire away hoping they will land their shells somewhere in enemy territory. Their reputation over here is something wicked, and I now believe all the stories about them being gutless wonders. If the British had the same equipment as they have, this war would have been over months ago.
By 1953, Korea has become the no-win war. Cameraman John Daniel covers the peace talks with the North Koreans that everyone hopes will bring it to an end.
Well, Dad, a ceasefire isn't with us yet. Last week, things looked very good when the North Koreans and Chinese put a big spanner in the works by saying no. While the conference was on in the tent, we had a little war of our own with the aid of snowballs. It was only by accident, naturally, when a North Korean guard was caught full in the face.
It will be another 6 months before an armistice is signed. The war costs 2 million lives. But the future has become a lot more frightening now that both sides of the Cold War have nuclear weapons.
On account
1957. The Cold War has become a race for bigger and better nuclear weapons. New Zealand observers are witnessing the latest British nuclear test on Malden Island in the Pacific. If Britain has the bomb, then New Zealand and Australia have the bomb. Roy Sefton is there for the test.
Dear Mum, most of us were on the upper deck and got a full view of it, including myself. We wore anti-flash clothing and dark goggles and covered our closed eyes with our hands. We sat down with our backs to the blast, and the aircraft let us know when she dropped it.
5.
We then heard the countdown as the bomb fell.
1.
There was a hell of a flash, which we could see through the hands over our eyes.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Open eyes.
After it'd gone off, we were told to stand up and take off our goggles and watch the blast. I must admit, it was a very tense time for all on board.
Britain conducts numerous nuclear tests in the Pacific region. Many take place in the Australian outback.
Only you can make this world seem right.
Christmas in the Desert, 1957. Woomera, South Australia. A town built for one purpose: long-range weapons testing. A Woomera resident describes life in the town.
There are 4,500 people in this town, men, women and kids, and they're all in the team. Everyone lives with this same idea. We're here to get the missiles up.
Living standards in Australia and New Zealand are among the highest in the world. But the leaders of the free world say that communism would take all this away. Former US President Harry S. Truman.
Communism is abhorrent. Communism is strangulation for the individual and death for the soul.
When you're out on that launcher, everyone must know their job. If anything goes wrong, if anything starts to burn, everyone's got to know where to run.
With communism on the move in Laos, Malaya and Vietnam, the West plans a dress rehearsal for nuclear war. In 1963, Australia, Great Britain and the United States stage an ominous experiment in the North Queensland rainforest. $50 tons of TNT explosives are packed onto a tower to replicate the blast of a nuclear bomb. The code name for the test is Operation Blowdown.
Minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
New Zealand and Australia have been fighting a jungle war in Malaya against communist insurgents. Vietnam will be the next battlefield. If the Western Allies decide to push the button, this is how their army would advance through a jungle flattened by a nuclear bomb. Australians and New Zealanders are learning to live with the bomb. B.P. Wilson writes to the New Zealand Herald.
Sir,
I would suggest that 99% of New Zealanders are seriously concerned that an atom bomb is about to be dropped on our doorstep. I would further suggest that more than words are necessary to prevent such a catastrophe. I am positive that the New Zealand government in office at the time the bomb is dropped can kiss goodbye to its political future.
New Zealand.
The good life, full of fun, seems to be the ideal.
The Civil Defence Department has issued a householder handbook for nuclear warfare.
Lets you hide.
You could survive a nuclear attack by taking simple precautions. Don't rush outside and expose yourself to radiation. If caught in the open, cover the nose and mouth with a handkerchief and seek the nearest shelter. Thoroughly wash exposed skin, hair and fingernails with soap and water. Remain calm.
Kiss the good life. Goodbye.
Vietnam, 1965. The United States is making a stand. The aggressive spread of communism will be stopped here and now. Australia has had military advisors in South Vietnam for 3 years. Like the United States, Australia is about to send combat troops to fight the communist forces. US President Lyndon B. Johnson.
There's not a boy that wears the uniform yonder today that hasn't always known that when freedom is at stake, that Australians will go all the way, as Americans will go all the way, not third of the way, not part of the way, not 3/4 the way, but all the way until liberty and freedom have won.
New Zealand sends a single artillery unit to operate under US command. The country is in no mood for war. But under pressure from the United States, Prime Minister Keith Holyoake must persuade a reluctant public.
This is a cruel, vicious war. If South Vietnam falls to the communists, it will then be the turn of Thailand and Malaysia and every other smaller country in the area. In this eventuality, the threat to New Zealand would be that much closer to home. And if we are not prepared to play our part now, can we in good conscience expect our allies to help later on? Communist terrorism must be halted.
A month before the New Zealanders begin operations, the 1st Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, arrives at Vung Tau. Gunner Jason Neville writes to his sister.
Well, the time's come, Roz. I have to go to war against a well-trained army, the Viet Cong. This operation will be as rough as hell, and a very bloody one. I hope and pray to God I do return. Lots of love, Jason.
For Australians, the Vietnam War provokes another bitter conflict. For the first time, men are conscripted for overseas service. 20-year-old males, selected by birthday, will be sent into combat. The New Zealand and Australian soldiers quickly learn that this is a war without a front. A guerrilla war against an elusive enemy. Conscript Stan Buick.
We were going to an area where the Viet Cong was the boss, and we didn't know a bloody thing about the place.
Not everyone has to be conscripted. For some, the war is an adventure.
Even as a little kid, I loved playing war games. I knew I'd only ever get one chance at experiencing it.
19-year-old Private Don Tate forgoes a day's rations a week to make room in his pack for a Super 8 camera.
I need you now. I want you back. I can't go on.
Couldn't think of a nobler thing to do than fight for your country, to lay your life down for it if need be. Look out, you yellow bastards. I'm out to get ya.
I've known you well, and if you want to stay, that's all right.
It's a different story for the first batch of conscripts. Only 3 weeks after their arrival in 1966, bad news breaks in Australia.
The first national serviceman in the Australian Army ever to die on foreign soil has been killed in an operation against the Viet Cong in Vietnam. The Army Department in Canberra announced today that he was Private Errol Wayne Noack, single, aged 21, of the Adelaide suburb of Gilberton.
From this point on, half of Australia's casualties in Vietnam will be conscripts. New Zealand is also suffering casualties. Brian Rowlands is with the 161 Battery.
Bit of bad news today. Stu Elwood was killed in action. He was a good fellow, very quiet, and he wouldn't harm a fly. He'd one kill to his credit before they got him, so he didn't come cheap. But it seems a bad couple of months for the Kiwis.
New Zealand and Australian casualties have been light compared to previous wars. But television brings the grim reality to the living room. Mrs. Alma Skaysbrook writes to the Save Our Sons movement.
I speak as the mother of 5 sons, and as a mother I'm thinking of the mothers of Vietnam. How can we justify the slaughter of civilians, men, women and children, or the use of napalm or phosphorus which burns until the victim is reduced to a sizzling mass?
Vietnam will be an unpopular war. Wellington turns out to greet the US president. October 1966. Lyndon B. Johnson is on a Pacific tour to shore up support for the war in Vietnam. Prime Minister Keith Holyoake.
So, on behalf of the people of New Zealand, A very warm, a very human welcome. 1,000 welcomes to you both. And on behalf of the Maori people who've already welcomed you in their language, kia ora. Good luck and good health.
New Zealand has 160 troops in Vietnam. Australia has 4,500.
I want to thank you for coming here in this
Johnson asks for a greater commitment from both nations.
in Texas as I'm getting here today. Hip, hip.
More than 1 million people line the streets when LBJ reaches Sydney. A supporter writes to the papers.
I love the United States and I think President Johnson is just wonderful. I'll be dreadfully ashamed if those people are rude enough to demonstrate against him.
But the tide of public opinion is turning. The demonstrators are now 10,000 strong. Prominent businessman Gordon Barton writes an open letter.
Dear Mr. President, out of a population of 11 million, we have had to depend on conscripts to make up 2 battalions to send to Vietnam. People all over the world are tired of military solutions and power politics. They are tired of anti-communism as a substitute for common sense. And above all, they are tired of the killing.
Never before has a war had this much public opposition. Yet the president wins the day. Australia will send in 2,000 more soldiers. New Zealand will triple its force to 500. Dawn, June the 3rd, 1969. In a war going badly for the Allies, tragedy strikes in the South China Sea. Shortly after 3 a.m., an American frigate had steered into the path of aircraft carrier HMAS Melbourne. The USS Frankie Evans is cut in two. Wessex helicopter pilot Graham Winterflood leads the search for survivors.
A feeling of uselessness settled upon me. We were back at the scene in about 5 minutes, and we saw the worst. Half of the Evans was alongside the Melbourne, and the bow had already sunk. 2 guys from the Evans were thrown off with the impact and landed on our flight deck. One didn't survive. The other had broken legs.
History has repeated itself. 5 years earlier, HMAS Voyager had also been sunk after colliding with the Melbourne. A crewman from the USS Evans gives his account to investigators.
I thought we could still make it. She was dead ahead now, about 800 yards and turning left. Mr. Hapson yelled out several times, "She's going to hit us! She's going to hit us!" The next instant, I heard a tremendous roar and was swept into the water.
With the United States now losing up to 400 combat soldiers a week in Vietnam, the loss of life in the South China Sea is a shattering blow. Graham Winterflood.
I feel great sorrow for the Americans, as they had just given us a Navy unit commendation. To be thanked with a sunken ship and 73 men lost.
Broken windows in
60s, New Zealand and Australia are now looking for a way out of Vietnam.
Human kindness overflowing.
The constant stream of entertainers keep up appearances, but morale remains low.
Scarecrows dressed in the latest styles, with frozen smiles to keep love away. Human kindness overflowing, and I think it's gonna rain
It has become a war where acts of madness are commonplace. An American soldier tries to shoot his commander. The bullet kills Australian singer Kathy Wayne by mistake. This is the last known film of the 19-year-old. What began 5 years ago as a whisper is now a roar. The anti-Vietnam marches are unprecedented. Hundreds of thousands of protesters around Australia demand an end to the war. Mrs. Barbara Alexander writes to the Australian Prime Minister.
Dear Mr. Gordon, I would be one of the first to expect my son to defend his country were the nation in danger. But as no emergency exists, it would be an immoral act for him to go into another country to commit evil. It is dishonorable that a 20-year-old youth should be forced to kill against his will in this war. Killing is against everything my boy has been taught.
Vietnam is in ruins. Gary Brooker is with the ANZACS battalion.
What is this war all about? With war in the paper one day and the news of a demonstration the next, no one knows who or what to believe.
A surgeon from the New Zealand Medical Corps writes home.
It must have been a beautiful country at one time. And look at it now. What will it become if the war goes on and on? I find the endless casualties so very depressing. We must do something to stop it. But I just can't see how.
The boys are coming home once more. The withdrawal of Allied troops from Vietnam is well underway by the end of 1971. But the war will continue for another 4 years. The people of Australia and New Zealand have changed. Support during the Cold War has become opposition to all wars. For many of the returning soldiers, the bitterness will go on for years. Private David Pye is 21 when he comes home.
A battalion march was organised through the city streets to honour our return. The amount of support for us was shown by the fact that the only people watching were relatives and shoppers.
Australia and New Zealand have fought side by side in a tradition born on the shores of Gallipoli on April 25th, 1915. On the eve of that first Anzac Day, 21-year-old Lieutenant Alan Dudley Henderson writes a letter to his family.
At last, we make our final move. While you're in church tomorrow thinking of us, we may be needing all your prayers. It's either going to be a hard fight or an easy walk-in. But everything's ready and everyone quietly confident of success. It's going to be our chance to make a tradition out of this that we must always look back on. God grant it'll be a great one.
Wednesday night at 7:30, join us for the premiere of the award-winning new series, Joan of Arcadia. Amber Tamblyn and Joe Mantegna face up to their daughter's unexpected conversations with God. Share their concerns at 7:30.
Colour of War, the ANZACS.
This war will affect the Anzac nations like no other.
Yours to own on DVD. Available in store from December 2.
We are just warming up, my girl.